Chiron transits really are something big. They perhaps don't have the same impact exactly as Pluto, Neptune and Uranus, but they do have impact. They can shift your life around. And we need to understand the essence of meaning within Chiron properly. The wounded healer title for it is understandable. Shot in the foot by an arrow, some say by himself, some say by another person. So he was wounded, and he was a teacher of medicine, the first teacher of medicine, also the first teacher of astrology. So this association with healing and teaching is really clear, written in mythology of Chiron. Now, Chiron was born of Kronos and a sea nymph, so a demigod. The centaurs, Chiron was a centaur. All of the centaurs were half horse and half man. Not a lot is said about female centaurs, strangely. So this wild and violent, lustful side of the human condition is associated with centaurs generally. But here we have Chiron, who is not like that. Chiron has overcome his wild and violent nature in order to study the mysteries. In fact, in order to create the mysteries. To be honest, the first astrology teacher, the first real practitioner of medicine. Quite a strong statement, isn't it? So that's why the associations between Chiron have been made with the description of wounded healer, is because mythologically that seems to fit. And to tie it up with Sagittarius comes from the fact that Chiron was a centaur. So Chiron typically is the last of these four hits of what astrologers are calling the midlife crisis. So by the time we get to 51 years old, we get to see that what we have been told about the world just isn't the case. And all of the energies that we had, the hormonal imperatives that were enslaving us, they no longer have the same power. So the wild, violent, lustful stuff that certainly is within us is moderated by the Chiron return. And the understanding that life is, what do they Buddhists say, life's a shit and then you die. It's not like that. But it is like that for anybody who has not awakened to Chiron consciousness. Anybody who thinks that Chiron is the wounded healer is putting two things outside of their own authority, their own sovereignty. They're saying, I was wounded by external circumstances. Something will come along and heal me of that. It's the passive sense. I don't get that at all. We're talking about a centaur here. It's a very, very powerful image, the centaur. Unlike a man, it's not. It's a centaur, a demigod. We don't give away our power if we're really up to that level of mastery where we can actually take on the energy of a demigod. We don't give along our power to anyone else by saying, he hurt me, heal me. That's not it. What Chiron does is gives us the capacity to shift our perception. But I see that the wounded healer derivation of meaning is secondary. Chiron essentially changes the status quo from what was normal to what isn't normal. You think about being the only centaur in his tribe, in his world of centaurs, that was not violent, wild and lustful and untamed. He became the one that overcame all of that. Well, that's what we do when we wake up to our spiritual sense of self. We tame the beast. We don't destroy it or repress it or pretend it's not there. We tame it. And because we have learned how to have that passionate life force within us in a controlled way, we've got the reins. We are no longer subject to the galloping off of this wild horse underneath the torso of the centaur. We're actually holding the reins. We can control the passion within us. That's a huge shift of perception. So, age 51, very typically we step into our power. And that's because we can see differently. We can see what's going on in the world and what's going on within ourselves and our lives. We can see it. We can awaken to a new perception. And we can understand that the passions in our body should not be repressed. Perfectly healthy. Absolutely perfectly healthy, unless overdone. Is there anything that is not described like that? Everything in moderation is fine. It all works out. Some things you've got to be very careful not to do too much. So I think that Chiron's gift to us, and its Chiron return, is to say, wake up to your passionate animal nature and use it appropriately. Wake up to the fact that nobody wounded you. You decided to incarnate into this set of circumstances where you had this mother and father who were going to do that to you by agreement. You set this up before you incarnated. You and your mum and your dad and the other actors in your life play had a chat before incarnation, and you all decided to come down and play this out because you wanted to experience whatever happened to you. And you had that experience, you needed that experience because that was the foundation for what you needed to do with your life. I, for example, had a father who made me a bit frightened, and so I developed a sensitivity to when he was approaching the house after work, and I would just move out of his way. Survival technique that I could not have developed had I not lived in a situation from the earliest age until I left home, where I had to be very, very careful not to upset my father. What I did then was to learn that sensitivity. I could feel him. Before I could see him or hear him, I could feel him. And I have that sensitivity of being able to feel things. Very unusual in a man. And that's what I based my career on. So I learned my career skill from my father's bullying. That's a chironic shift to perception, to turn it around. And I came to that understanding on my Chiron return. It's true to say that all of us have this. Each of us has been badly treated as a child, and we find that to be our wound. The thing is that Chiron can get you to do is to see that as self-inflicted for a purpose. It's not a wound, it's a training. And that's how you learn to develop survival techniques. How did you cope with that early life experience? What did you do? What skills and abilities did you develop in order to avoid that which was painful when you were very young? That's the clue as to what your life is for. The skill that you developed in very, very early childhood as a protection against the bullying of the world, that skill is your gift to the world. That's your Chiron return knowledge. Now, when Chiron is transiting other major points in the chart, if it crosses the Ascendant, then the way you perceive the world and the way the world perceives you is going to go through one of those shifts. And that would also very deeply, it'd be very likely to affect your way of relating. Your relationships one-to-one, particularly because the ascendant-descendant are in opposition. Any Chiron transit to the ascendant is a Chiron transit to the descendant, necessarily. So you're going to change who you are in some way, and therefore how you are with relationship. So this is very often engineered by a shift of circumstances. You might meet with different people, change your job or something like that. All of these things are very likely when Chiron crosses the Ascendant. But mainly your ability to see the world in its nuanced form. You could actually see beneath the surface. You can understand things that you didn't understand before. You can reconcile paradoxes in your mind. You get what's going on. and you get that it's your responsibility. What's happened to you is your fault. Fixing it is your responsibility. You get that. And, the same with Chiron crossing the midheaven. You'll understand that where you're living, the IC, and what you do to develop a social role, your career very often, the MC, these go through the same thing. You might wake up to realize that what you've been doing is just like, why am I doing that? It's just not me. It's not right. You might go through one of those experiences when Chiron crosses your midheaven. And when Chiron is in transit to your Sun, conjunct, opposition, square, actually that applies across the board mostly. When Chiron's crossing your Sun, you're going to have a bit of an awakening experience. What's important about the Sun's position in your chart is self-identity. Now, that might sound so simple, but it isn't. We're trained, bullied, conditioned, brainwashed into believing that there's a way of being, right way, and if you're not behaving in the right way, then you're wrong. Not you're behaving wrongly, but you are a wrong thing. There's a lot of pressure towards that. And Chiron's just saying, well, there's any manner of ways of being. There isn't a right way and a wrong way. Look, there's all of these examples of how to be, and it's for me now to find a way I choose to be. It's like a wake-up call in a sense. You have to claim who you are. It's not a gift. It's not a reward. It's not the veils parting. But in the end, you have to claim. You have to say that this is what I am, with strength and determination and against opposition. Now, if you've got Chiron on your side, opposition is very easily dealt with. And you can be like that. You can be strong enough to say, enough of your nonsense. I'm like this. I'm strong enough to be like this. I want to be my own person. That's a Chiron Sun transit. Now, a Chiron Moon transit is the same kind of thing, but rather differently expressed. We have this phrase, cutting the apron strings. Now, a mother loving a baby has to be a certain way with her love. She's not going to take the baby, there's the food, there's the spoon, get on with it. The baby would starve. That doesn't work. That's the father's teaching, much more so. Although I don't want to get gender biased here, but it's very often the case that a baby is brought up with the mother being closest for obvious biological reasons. So that first way in which the mother loves the child, it's very hard for a mother to evolve that and love an older child differently and appropriately. So it is the child's duty to make sure that the mother does not impose upon the child too much love. Silly phrase. Too much of the wrong kind of caring love. Too much requirement to be small and incapable. And mothers can do that. They can actually serve us so much for too long that we actually become incapable of standing on our own feet. So Chiron comes along and is saying, God's sake, grow up. Get away from your mother. She's spoiling you. She's diminishing your power in the world at large. And that's quite a breakthrough of understanding. Hence this kind of idea of wounded healer. The understanding that we have in there is like weaning. We need to wean ourselves from our mother. A very painful event. You're born into the world, you have milk from the mother, and then you have to stop doing that. That's the first really big separation shock in our lives, isn't it? Well, we have to do that again and again and again. And when Chiron crosses the moon, you've got to do it again. And so all of your childhood emotions around needing mother, they come up. And that's not pleasant. So that's where the astrologers tend to sort of call it the wounded healer. It's like you've got to experience the wound in order to heal it. That's very profound wisdom, which was not in our psyche, really, fully, generally, until Chiron was discovered in the 70s. And then in the 80s, all these workshops and so on took place. And we knew that then. Everybody knew that. And nobody had known that before. You know, maybe going back to Jung, possibly, but not generally. So when Chiron was discovered, we discovered this principle that we need to face our pain in order to heal it. And that brings about the perceptual shift that we need then to go on and do great things. And unless you heal yourself of your childhood issues, the great things that you do, which may not be diminished, will necessarily be distorted. Chiron Venus, you'll heal your relationships, perhaps, on a certain way of relating to people. Chiron Mars, you won't be so angry. You might be more assertive and devotional. Chiron Jupiter, you'll be more benign in your growthful attitude to life rather than greedy and hungry for power and position. Chiron Saturn, you'll find a balanced way with society, not rebellious too much, not subservient and obsequious too much. You find that balance. Chiron Mercury, you might find a different way of communicating that's more effective.